Howdy, strangers. It's Mrs. Klein.
Knock, knock. It's Mrs. Wolbrand.
We are here with your second podcast for Lesson 8, Creating the Constitution.
Yep. And we have the same guiding question. What compromises emerged from the Constitutional Convention? And we're going to jump right in today, guys, with slavery. And the issue on the table at the Constitutional Convention is how should slaves be counted?
All right, remember, because
in
representation, when they're trying to figure out like how many senators or how many representatives, not senators, but how many representatives each state is going to have.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
And so the debate, slaves, people or property?
Yep.
By the time of the convention, 9/10 of the slaves in the United States lived in the South.
Wow.
Like everyone else, Southerners wanted as many representatives in the House of Representatives as possible. So they argued that slaves should be counted the same as any other people in determining representation.
Holy moly. All right, some new thinking on slavery. All right, so the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution forced many whites to re-examine their views on slavery, and some became active in trying to end what they saw as a great evil. In the North, this new thinking led one state after another to pass laws ending slavery. And we learned a little bit about that during the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
All right.
We did.
Yep.
Although many Southerners were uneasy about slavery, they were not ready to abolish it. The South's economy was still very dependent on the labor of enslaved African Americans.
All right, so the resolution, this is how they're going to solve this issue. It's called the 3/5 Compromise. After a bitter debate, Madison proposed a compromise. Count each slave as 3/5 of a person, he suggested, when determining a state's population for representation in the House of Representatives. The delegates approved this idea, which became known as the 3/5 Compromise, because it seemed the only way to keep the convention moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, another slavery issue. A dispute over trade raised another issue about slavery. To help business in the North, Northern delegates favored giving Congress broad power to control trade between the states and other countries. But this proposal made Southern delegates nervous. They worried that Congress might try to tax Southern export crops, such as rice and tobacco. Southerners also worried that Congress would use its power over trade to outlaw the slave trade, which is the importing of slaves from Africa.
All right, so more compromises on slavery happen. All right, again, the delegates settled on a compromise. Congress would have the power to control trade, but with two limitations. First, Congress could not place any tax on exports to other countries. Second, Congress could not interfere with the slave trade for 20 years, or until 1808, when the Slave Importation Clause took effect.
Yeah. To satisfy Southerners, the delegates also agreed to a provision known as the Fugitive Slave Clause. This clause said that escaped slaves had to be returned to their owners, even if they were caught in a free state.
Yikes. All right, here's another issue, you guys. How should the chief executive be elected? All right, another major question facing the delegates concerned who would head the new government's executive branch. Early in the convention, Charles Pinckney urged the creation of a vigorous executive. James Wilson followed with a proposal that a single person serve as the chief executive.
A sudden silence fell over the convention. The very idea of a single executive brought to mind unhappy memories of King George III.
Yikes, that tyrant. All right, Edmund Randolph of Virginia disliked this proposal, preferring a 3-member executive drawn from different parts of the country. 3 people, he argued, could lead the country better than one.
Yeah. In spite of objections, the framers agreed to a single executive to be called the president.
All right, equally troubling was the issue of how to choose the chief executive, since some delegates wanted Congress to actually appoint the president.
Yeah, and several delegates thought that the people should elect the president. But James Madison argued that voters would naturally vote for someone in their own state. As a result, this method would not be fair to candidates from small states.
Still, others suggested that the president be elected by a specially chosen group of electors from each state. Such a group, they felt, would be able to look beyond state interests to make a wise choice for the entire country.
Okay, which brings us to the Electoral College.
Yeah, there we go.
After some 60 votes on the issue of how to elect the president, the framers reached another compromise. Neither Congress nor the people, they decided, should choose the president and vice president. Instead, a special body called the Electoral College should elect the government's leaders.
All right. The Electoral College is made up of electors who cast votes to elect the president and vice president every 4 years. Each state has as many electors in the Electoral College as the number of senators and representatives it sends to Congress. The votes cast by the electors are called electoral votes.
Yeah, it's very cool how that all.
It is kind of
Yeah.
interesting, and California has the biggest number of electors because we have the highest population in the country. And so
Yes.
we've got the greatest number of electors in the Electoral College.
Yes. Okay, now we need to talk about political parties and elections. The Electoral College system seems very odd to most Americans today. In our age of instant communication, it's hard to appreciate the framers' concern that voters would not know
Yeah.
enough about candidates outside their own state to choose a president wisely.
All right, the Electoral College system still affects presidential elections today. In most states, the candidate who gets the most votes, even if less than a majority, wins all of that state's electoral votes. As a result, a candidate can win a majority in the Electoral College without necessarily winning a majority of the votes cast across the country. That's happened several times recently.
Yes, it
Okay.
has. Okay, the convention ends. By the end of summer, the hard work of designing the Constitution was completed. However, the new proposal still had to be needed to be approved by the states.
The first question before the framers was how many states would have to ratify or approve the Constitution before it could go into effect. Should ratification require approval by all 13 states or by a majority of 7 states? Ultimately, the framers compromised on 9 states.
The second question was who should ratify the Constitution, the people or the state legislatures? James Madison argued strongly that the people were the fountain of all power and should decide. The majority of delegates agreed, and after the delegates signed the Constitution, the document was later ratified at special conventions by delegates elected by the people in each state.
All right, on September 17th, 1787, the delegates declared the Constitution complete.
Okay, now the Constitution needs to go to the states. Newspapers in every state printed the Constitution as soon as they could get it. What the readers found was a plan that would create a federal system of government in which strong national government shared powers with the states.
Supporters of the Constitution called themselves Federalists. The Federalists argued that the Constitution would create a national government that was strong enough to unite the quarreling states into a single republic.
Yeah. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay led the Federalist campaign for ratification. In a series of newspaper essays, they recalled the weaknesses of the government under the Articles of Confederation. They showed how the Constitution would remedy these weaknesses by creating a stronger, more effective union of the states.
All right, the influential articles written by Madison, Hamilton, and Jay were later collected and published as the Federalist Papers.
All right. The Anti-Federalists. Anti-Federalists were opponents of the Constitution, and they found much to dislike about the new plan. Congress, they feared, would burden the country with taxes. They also claimed that the president had power enough to rule like a king, and that the judicial branch would overpower state courts.
The Anti-Federalists also complained about what was missing from the plan, primarily that the plan listed the powers of the government, but not the rights of the people.
Yeah. Okay, guys, and we're going to just review all that you heard because you heard more compromises
Yep.
now that can answer that guiding question. The first one that you heard about was the 3/5 compromise, and this settled the question on how slaves were to be counted in determining a state's population.
All right, then we learned about the Electoral College and the chief executive. Another compromise created a single chief executive to be chosen by the Electoral College.
Okay, and remember, delegates signed the Constitution in September of 1787. They agreed that 9 of the 13 states had to ratify the Constitution before it could go into effect.
All right, remember you guys that we have that guiding question. Hopefully by now you should be able to have a rich response, right? What compromises emerged from the Constitutional Convention? And I think right now we're done.
Okay, bye.